Delilah is absent for the record.
Okay. Great. Well, I know it's been a little while since we met, but we can jump right into it.
I'm Nancy Jones. I am principal on the California Housing Audits, and Lori is going to be my page turner. So what I'm going to do this morning is just give you some results. Was I not on? Oh, yeah, I couldn't possibly have been on because I sound very different. All right, so what I'm going to do this morning is give you the results of our audits. And this is for the Finance Fund as of the year ended June 30th of 2016, and the Insurance Fund as of December 31st, 2015. And so, without further ado, in your audit packets, you have information that comes from our team. The team is made up of myself, Mandy Hagee, who is a principal, and also you're very lucky to have her because she is our sub-niche chair for housing authorities. So she has tremendous experience in the housing authority area. Liz Richardson and Lindsay Lariah that are fully devoted to housing authorities. And Karen Engel was a new staff person this year. And we do that every year. We bring on additional people so that and then we'll move them up in rank. So eventually, hopefully, Liz will take over as your principal in a number of years. Okay, and so within that, what I want to tell you about our audit approach. You're going backwards.
Start over.
It's not exactly. I pressed the down, but it's not doing page down because we're in.
Okay, so we're having a little difficulty.
Just use it this way.
We're going to talk to you today about our audit approach, the audit results, want to specifically address the single audit. The single audit is part of the audit for the Finance Fund. And then we're going to go over required communications, and I'll cover briefly some future pronouncements, things that you want to be aware of in the future that will affect your accounting and potentially the reporting on your financial statements. So we have an integrated approach. We bring out IT specialists who do a lot of the development of testing of anything that is a computer-related control. And they give us enough information so that we have a good understanding of how your systems work together so that we can do a more effective audit and a more efficient audit. And so your auditors, we're not IT specialists, but we rely on our IT specialists and work with them consistently. And then what that does is that allows us to do a very risk-based assessment of your processes and procedures and determine where the most likely risks of misstatement could occur, and then focus our audit procedures on the highest risk areas. Then within the audit process, we do a lot of communication. So we'll talk about what the risks are. We'll ask for information on anything that's new, anything that is a new requirement, or any new lines of business, anything that could increase risk. So we go through that, and we have frequent meetings with management in order to determine our audit approach and also update the audit plan. And we also convey to the audit committee our audit approach and the standards that we operate under before the audit starts. And then again, if there was anything that was really significant that we would want to bring to your attention, if you had major issues, we would communicate that during the process as well as at the end of the audits. The information, if we waited till the very end, could be too stale, and we want to give you a chance to respond appropriately. Okay, so for the Finance Fund, the opinion on the financial statement is unmodified. The Finance Fund, the financial statements are your financial statements. So what really belongs to your auditors are the auditor's reports. And everything else is yours. So I'm not really going to go over in detail the financial information. Hopefully you received that with your packet. And I will communicate a few things related to specific items that came up, but primarily the audit opinions belong to your auditors, that's us. And on the financial statements, you had an unmodified opinion, meaning that we were able to say that the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects, meaning that a user would not be materially misled from reading those financial statements. Then we also issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements that is performed in accordance with government auditing standards. That's a mouthful. What that is also commonly referred to as a yellow book report. It's really what internal controls you have over financial reporting. We test those and we report on those at the end of that audit. In addition, if there are any financial statement level compliance requirements that have been affected, we will report on that as well. So this report was also unmodified. It is not an opinion on internal control, but it reports back to you that we have found no material weaknesses in internal control at the financial statement level. There were no audit adjustments in the current year. All adjustments came through from management, meaning that your auditors did not have to develop those adjustments. There were no past adjustments. A past adjustment is something that is very small, but we want to bring it to management's attention and allow them to choose whether or not it needs to be recorded. And there were none to even bring up this year. And there were no internal control deficiencies, as we noted, at the financial statement level. The single audit reports that we issue a report on the compliance for each major federal program and on internal control over compliance, and a report on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And that report is required by the uniform guidance, which replaced the old guidance under A133, which you may be used to hearing it referred to as, but now it's under the uniform guidance. And that was an unmodified report and 2 findings, and we're going to go over those in just a little bit. But those findings were related to the Section 8 project-based cluster. Okay, so in those findings, we had other non-compliance and a significant deficiency where 2 of the 10 projects that were monitored by the fund didn't deposit their required deposit to the residual receipt account within 90 days of their fiscal year end. And then our other issue that we brought forward was that one of 17 projects didn't make their required monthly deposits to the replacement reserve account. And within those, we test this on an annual basis. These are new compliance findings in the current year. We had 1 compliance finding in the prior year, and that is not repeated. So that's a good thing, because if you have repeated findings year over year, then the federal government, as they monitor these reports, will say, why aren't you correcting these? It is not unusual for entities to have compliance findings. In fact, that is really a relatively normal process because no one is perfect, and we have people that are actually administering programs, and so errors can happen, and you're reported on those on an annual basis. So you can keep track of whether or not things are recurring, because if they are, then that's a red flag for you that something is not quite right and that you're not addressing the issues as they occur. So in the current situation, you've actually made some changes already to prevent these from happening in the future. But within the findings that we noted on the 2, you had programs whose audits were delayed because of things that were not preventable. And so there's really nothing you can do about that. That can happen again. Someone was not able to certify their audit. The audit was performed, but it didn't get certified and submitted in a timely basis, and so this allowed not to have the reporting within 90 days of their fiscal year end, which is required. There was a death, and then there was a death in a family, I believe, and an illness. So those things you can't really prevent. So there is really no action item that you can take to correct that. On the other, you can make a correction, and I believe you have a correction in process. So any questions on that?
We'll save those.
Okay.
There's a couple questions. We'll bring
Okay,
that up
that's
later.
fine. All right, so within your packet, you'll also see that you get a letter from us, which is called the Letter to Governance. And in that letter, we explain what the auditor's responsibility is and what management's responsibility is. So as I said, the audit reports belong to the auditors. The financial statements are the responsibility of management. And then we perform our audit for the purpose of determining and forming an opinion on whether or not the financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And the generally accepted accounting principles that apply to California Housing Finance Fund are in accordance with government accounting standards boards. And that is how we performed our audit. It was in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. In addition, because you have a single audit, an audit under the uniform guidance, we also follow government auditing standards, which is why you had that really long named report for government auditing standards at the financial statement level. And we follow the uniform guidance requirements. Okay, so we're going to report to you on some of the things that you need to know about your financial statements. The financial statement policies and procedures, management is the one who gets to pick what those are in accordance with the accounting standards that are out there. So the significant accounting policies are disclosed in Note 1 to the financial statements. And those are things like how you would develop your estimates for the allowance for loan losses, those types of things. Also things like how the investments are valued and reported. That's all reported in your note to the financial statements. And I highly encourage you to look through that because it puts the financial information more in perspective. And then you had 3 new accounting pronouncements that were adopted during the current year, which was GASB 72, which is a statement on fair value measurement and application. And what that did was it requires fair value measurement of investments. You already valued your investments at fair value, so no change to the amounts that are reported, but it did require some additional disclosures. And those disclosures are related to how the fair value is arrived at. There are methods that you want to use, the most observable input that you have. So an observable input, for example, might be that a like investment traded on a market, you could value your investments at that like investment value. And that's an observable input. Then there are things like having to have amounts that are appraised on an annual basis. That is like the least observable input. So those are rated on levels, and those are the additional disclosures that you are required to have in your financial statements this year. And so management developed additional disclosures. They consulted with us to determine that those disclosures were appropriate, and we worked together to ensure that you met all the requirements for the additional disclosures. And then GASB 73, the accounting and financial reporting for pensions and related assets that are not within the scope of GASB 68. There was no effect, but that was actually implemented during the current year. It's a standard that's effective. But your pension plan that you have reporting for is covered by GASB 68. And if you remember, for the finance fund in 2015 is the first year that that was effective for you. And then GASB 76, which is the hierarchy of generally accepted accounting principles for state and local governments, there was no effect. You were already following the standards that you needed to follow. This really clarifies at what level those standards need to be observed. Okay, then the preparation of the financial statements. We talk about certain estimates that management had to make. The significant ones that you need to know about are the allowance for loan losses, the fair value of investments, valuation of derivative instruments and their effectiveness, and the fair value of those derivative instruments, and the net pension liability and their deferred inflows and outflows. So we look at all of those estimates and perform tests of management's key information that they base those estimates on. And so we have concluded that management has a reasonable basis for those significant estimates, meaning that we did not know any bias and determined that those are reasonable to arrive at a reasonable conclusion and not misstate your financial statements. Okay, difficulties that were encountered in performing the audit. We did not have any difficulties with management in performing the audit. Management was able to provide timely, accurate financial information and supporting documentation for us to audit. We did, however, have a difficulty, which actually delayed your audit slightly for the finance fund and incredibly for the insurance fund. And that is that because you now have to report under GASB 68, the valuation of the pensions and the deferred inflows and deferred outflows related to that, you have to wait until the State Controller's Office provides that information for your agency within the state government. And they can't do their calculations until they have gotten the audited information. And so since the audited information comes out at a certain time, then that means that you don't get your agency information until that's done. I believe this year that was received it was dated the 23rd of September and received the 25th of September. 26th. Okay, so that makes it very late in the process to get your financial statements issued on a timely basis, especially for the December 2015 statements for the insurance fund, because we also have to wait for that information as well, because we cannot assume that there are no changes to the net pension liability. In fact, we know that every year net pension liability is going to change, and that information has to be auditable before your financial statements can be delivered, because that's a material amount in the financial statements. So as a result of that, then management did have to make adjustments, but management made those adjustments. They did the calculations themselves. We audited those calculations, and we're satisfied that the calculations were correct and that they are not materially misstating the financial statements. So then, therefore, we did not have to record any corrections or misstatements, and we didn't have any uncorrected misstatements, things that were so small that just management decided to let go through. And then, based on our audit, we have to receive representations from management about the information that they've provided to us, because an audit is based on the premise that management is ethical and forthcoming with the information. And so part of that is that they will present a letter to us that says that they've provided all the information that we needed, that they haven't really hidden anything. If there's a finding, they've brought it forward and let us know. If they've received a communication from a funding agency, they would let us know about that. If there were lawsuits against the agency, they'd let us know about those things. And that's what that letter does. It says that everything that management that we've asked management to provide, that they have provided. And they were able to sign that representation letter. And then we're also required to tell you if management had gone out and consulted with other accountants before the audit was entered into, or if we had a disagreement about how things should be presented in the financial statements. And management did not make any other consultations, which leads into the next thing, that we didn't have disagreements with management on the financial accounting or reporting matters. We did not have any other significant findings or issues that we need to bring forward that we haven't already addressed. And within your financial statements for the finance fund, you have certain required supplementary information. And that required supplementary information is not audited at the level that the financial statements are audited. So we do not give an opinion on that. We instead tell you the limited procedures that we've performed, and that management has provided that information and that it's consistent with the prior year. The methodology has not changed, or any changes in methodology had there been any. There were no changes in methodology. So we have ensured that that is consistent with the rest of the audited information, but we have not performed sufficient procedures to give you an opinion on that. On the single audit, included in your financial statements, you'll have the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and that information is provided by management. And so we are able to determine that that information was either directly derived from the financial statements or could be reconciled back to the financial statements. So in that instance, we can report that those amounts are fairly stated in connection to your financial statements as a whole. So that's the schedule of expenditures of federal awards and any combining schedules. That all of that information is fairly stated in relation to the financial statements as a whole. Still not an audit opinion, but we perform additional procedures on those. And that's included in your financial statement auditor's report. So some of the future pronouncements that are coming forward that we'd like you to be aware of is the financial reporting for post-employment benefit plans other than pension plans. This one actually relates to what we're going to call OPEBs, because everybody likes a good acronym. So OPEBs have a liability just like a pension does. The accounting for those is now going to mirror the accounting that a pension plan goes under. So just like you had a large impact from implementing GASB 68, once the OPEBs have had a year where they have developed their estimates and have information such that it can be reported in employer financial statements, that's under GASB 74, then GASB 75 will come into effect for employers. And that's going to then require similar disclosures and adjustments that you had for your pension plans. So additional large liabilities may get recorded in your financial statements. At this point, management cannot even make a beginning estimate for that, because just like the pension estimate comes from the state controller's office, so will the other, the OPEB estimate. And then GASB 79 is for certain external investment pools and pool participants, and that really relates to how the pools that you use are valued, and that's not going to have an effect. You're not in those certain external investment pools. GASB 80 is blending requirements for component units, and you don't have any blending requirements for those component units, and so it's not going to have an effect on your financial statements.
Nancy, are these new this year?
These are future pronouncements and issues. For example, 74 is effective for the OPEBs this next year, right? But 75 will be 1 year later, because you have to have one full year at the plan itself before it becomes effective for you. 79, it's not going to have an effect, but it would be effective for you for the June 30, 2017. So on the GASB 81, irrevocable split interest agreements, you don't receive split interest agreements, so that won't have any effect on you. It is, however, upcoming for other governments. And then GASB 82, which is an amendment of the GASB statements 67, 68, and 73. That really relates to some of the disclosure issues. It's not going to have an effect on your financial statements.
Do
Okay, so the
you need some
insurance.
water?
Pardon me?
Do you need water? You all right?
I think I'm okay so far.
Okay.
Do I look like I need water?
I thought you were choking up a little bit.
I think I'm good. I
Okay.
think I'm good. Okay, so the next one we're going to go over is the insurance fund. And this report normally comes out in May, but this year this was issued about the same time as the finance fund report. And the reason for that extensive delay was because this is the first year for GASB 68, because it's a 12/31/2015 year end. And the measurements required under that new standard had to be based on an actuarial valuation report that was no older than 1 year. And your measurement date for the 2015 year was in 2014. So it was older, in June of 2014. That made it older than 1 year. So we had to delay the issuance of this report in order to get the information from the 2015 measurement date, which is the information that was received September 23rd. So as you see, that's going to make that report probably less than useful for you at this point, because it's pretty old at this point. The information is as of 12/31 of 2015. However, that's unavoidable given that the estimate had to be made for the financial information related to GASB 68. Now, I do want to point out that you had requested from the legislature a waiver such that you could change the requirements for the loan insurance fund from providing an audit. The loan insurance fund, as you remember, will be phasing out, and in fact has contracts that run out at the end of 2018. And so because of that, you are recording less and less activity, and you have less and less people associated with that, and you need to save some additional administrative costs. So you won't be having an audit in the future for the loan insurance fund. Instead, you're going to be able to switch to agreed upon procedures. So the biennial report that you get, that will come out again in 2018, will have an agreed upon procedures information in it rather than the audited information. But regardless, with the auditor's opinion on the financial statements, because the housing loan insurance fund does not have sufficient resources and really is running through the last of its contracts, we have put an emphasis of a matter opinion that brings people's attention to the fact that you may not be able to continue as a going concern. And that's included in the financial statements in Note 2. I want to bring your attention to that. Management has plans to keep this in operation through 1 year after the financial statements are issued. But there is an end date in sight for the loan insurance fund. You are no longer insuring new mortgages. And as far as I know, from all information, you have no intention of starting that up again. So each year that we have audited, you've had less and less claims. The claims have gone down, which is a good thing because the economy is improving, but there are still claims coming forward. And so that will be ending. So within that audit, we did not have to make any audit adjustments for the current year. And management was able to make their own adjustment for the GASB 68 calculation, and then we were able to audit that adjustment to ensure that it was fairly stated. And there were no past adjustments. And I already mentioned that the financial statements were delayed due to late information from the pension. And then we have a management letter that we've issued that includes the finding around the going concern issue, that we really think that management needs to address this issue and proactively develop and document a plan for continued operation of the insurance fund after the reinsurance treaty expires in December 31st of 2018. We think that's a critical thing that you need to be addressing. And that's everything I have for you.
Very thorough. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Any comments from other members? Mr. Schaefer.
I know this is subsumed in your opinion letter that was submitted with the statements, but prudence requires that I ask this question. This is a corporate culture question.
Okay.
Were you given appropriate levels of access to all of the appropriate levels of management, including divisional management, to make you completely comfortable about the internal control culture and the application of internal controls?
Yes, we had free and open access to all individuals within the housing fund. So we were very satisfied that we did not have to go through anyone to make appointments or get approval to approach people. We were able to select who we wanted to talk to and have free and open conversations.
Thank you. And then I have just one more. I will probably find this if I look hard enough, and certainly I can get the answer to this question if I ask Mr. Sue, but prudence requires that I ask you this question as well. Are you prepared at the very top level to describe your level of satisfaction with the process used by management to evaluate the fair market value of interest rate derivatives?
Could I give you the overview? Not from memory, but I certainly have the documentation that would allow me to address that for you and to bring it forward.
Thank you.
Good questions.
And that's all I have.
So we have, I guess, since it's now the third time we've looked at this Section 8 program, and it's the third time we've had some exceptions there, I noticed that in the audit, management has figured out email notification, but I guess, Janet, can you come up and just talk a little bit about that and why going forward there won't be any other exceptions in this program?
Good morning. What we started was a new procedure where we would notify the properties 60 days prior to the end of the property's fiscal year, and we're going to be doing it on a monthly basis to inform them that the audits are due within 90 days after their fiscal year end. So we're doing a monthly reminders to the property about the submission of the audits and any residual receipts to them. We're also going to be including it, or it has been included in our audit handbook that is available on our website. And we will also be putting that as a reminder when we actually do approve the audit letters, to put that little statement in also that the audits are due within 90 days, because auditors will ask for prior year's audit review letters. And so hopefully with different forms of communication, they will notice that that requirement is there.
Okay, good. And then I guess the monitoring of the reserve deposit requirements?
Yes, we have automated that. There's a couple of things that we have done in regards to when we get a replacement reserve adjustment. We now have an automated process where it goes through the approval of a chief, and then it's automated to have a tickler that is time sensitive, that it has to be acted upon, that it will go to our accounting division, and it will be uploaded into their system with a tickler of when that particular date is reached, that amount is adjusted in the system. And then accounting will close that out, and a reminder is then sent over to the asset manager. And also we get a monthly report from our accounting division that tells us what the monthly amounts are, and we then verify from our correspondence that those are the correct amounts.
All right, good. I know this has been, it's a good program for the agency, and I know we've been trying to figure out how to coordinate it, and I'm glad we've been able to be proactive at each time the auditor's found an exception and been able to fix it. Most certainly, I was just going to defer to you.
So one of the things we are looking into as well is on our asset management side, taking a deeper dive into our policies and procedures for that division that actually manages some of these programs, because I too, as the chair has noted, have been concerned that we've reviewed this program 3 times, and 3 times we've had some audit findings. So Ben Frank, who did the deeper dive in process and procedures for multifamily, we're in conversations with him to take a deeper dive into processes and procedures, specifically focusing on our asset management.
Perfect. Thank you, Tia. I think I am satisfied. I know that this may be or is your last meeting. and you're already filling in. Didn't expect to be here, but Nancy, I certainly wanted to commend you. It's been a pleasure working with you over the past years. You've certainly lifted my knowledge with your requirement to talk every year, and so it's been excellent working with you, and certainly wish you the best. And we know Mandy's going to be real good, as she's been on the team from the beginning as well, so we look forward to that transition. I guess final thoughts, Lori, I'd offer, if you have anything you want to add, I'd give it to you.
No, I just wanted to second that, it's been wonderful working
Yeah.
with Nancy and her team over the numerous years, and that we look forward to working with Mandy in her new capacity. It is sad to see Nancy go, but, hopefully she may be around to be a second review partner in a year or so. But thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. And I really have to stress that we get excellent cooperation from everyone at the agency, and makes it a pleasure to work with them. And the fact that you, as an audit committee, are very involved in the process is very encouraging as well. So we like to have a tough but fair audit process with everyone informed. And so we've been able to do that here, and very, very pleasant to work with. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Anything else from you? Anything else for the rest of the board? All right, with that, we adjourn the audit committee meeting.